here was talking about treatment of buried oil.
Right. Okay.
So rather than use Deepwater Horizon as the mental model for how you do that, we're going to show results from a spill in Tampa Bay, Florida. This is the range of the Gulf of Mexico. I want to show you the range of techniques to use to deal with buried oil removal. This was release of about 328,000 gallons of heavy number 6 fuel oil right at the entrance to the Tampa Bay, and it was on an ebbing tide, so the oil went offshore, and then there was a very low wind conditions, and so the oil floated around for about 3 days offshore. And there's a little story about why they didn't get all the skimming done, but we won't go into that. But it happened on the 10th of August. And you can see here's the vessel. Actually, there were 3 vessels involved in this release, and the one that spilled the oil was the least culpable, but we still call it the Bouchard spill. And you can sort of see that person standing in the corner. You see what a big hole it was in the side of the barge that released the oil. And so, you know, the oil went offshore for 3 days, and then we had a little onshore blow on the 4th day. And so the next morning, on the 15th of August, the oil came ashore. There's pictures of it all coming ashore. You can see it's, you know, there's quite a bit of oil pushed up there, right at the, you know, with this during little blows, so pushed up pretty high in the intertidal and supertidal zone. And then, essentially, a very short period, just within almost 24 hours, people didn't think about it, but the oil got buried. And so this is what it looks like the next day. So you see the oil is just a little band at the high tide line. And they said, we don't need any scat teams. You know, we can see the oil. You guys go look at the mangroves and do everything else. You know, we don't need those stinking scat, right? And so they were going to, go out and do manual removal, because essentially they thought it was on the surface, they could see it, and they wanted to minimize sediment removal because every grain of sand has to be replaced and everything else. And so they only used mechanical equipment for hauling. So here's some pictures. This is an area, of course, in St. Pete where there were only 2 places along about a 12-mile length of beach where you could actually get access to the beach. They had to use a lot of equipment to haul men, workers, and waste materials, you know, between on and off the beaches. So you can see the back shore there is all these seawalls and hotels. And so within very few days, you know, they had 1,200 workers out there in August picking up the oil, and within a few days, you know, there was no oil anywhere. But, you know, there wasn't even a cigarette butt on the beach. They were picking up everything. And so you're almost done, because you know, what happens at the end of August, early September? Labor Day, really important and economic value to all the hotels and restaurants and things on the beach. So very quick removal of the surface oil. Everybody was like, yay, we're going to make it. And then what happened was, so here is on the 20th of August, the top profile, you can see that there's all the surface oil has been picked up manually. But they were told, don't dig in the beach. You want to just scrape off the clean layer. So, did you do something?
I did. I'm sorry.
Okay, so you want to, is that good?
Hold on.
And so, but they said no digging, because they figured digging would increase the amount of sediment removed. And so, and so after a while, you know what happens on the sand beach? You know, erosion, deposition cycles go through, and all of a sudden it started to erode a little bit, and people started finding some oils. You can see this is some oil tar balls and things, you know, starting to be exposed in the middle part of the beach. Oh my God! You know, it was a surprise to everybody. And you can see there's some of it oozing up. Of course, the contractor said yes.
We're nonprofit.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So now we have to deal with buried oil. Okay? We don't know where it is because nobody bothered to do any surveys. It ranged from continuous thick layers to very scattered tar balls. And now we have a potential for a much larger volume of sediment to be removed, because you have a clean overburden. And we're also trying to do it very quickly because, again, we're still trying to have the beaches opened up by Labor Day. So we had to use a combination of manual and mechanical methods. And how do we select those? So we formed a sort of a special task force with representatives from, we had the state geologist, I represented the Coast Guard, we had somebody represent the RP. We did a preliminary survey trying to get a scale of the problem in terms of, how many miles and what kind of oiling there might be that was buried. And we identified possible cleanup options, and then we just did field tests. to figure out, what was the best technique. Because we had a whole bunch of these front-end loaders that were being used to haul the waste materials, to the staging areas to be transported off-site. So we had we took one of those, the front-end loaders, and we said, give us your best operator. And because so we're trying to do, and the front-end loader will go across the beach, from the high to the lower part of the beach. And you can see the results here were very variable. With one pass, you don't want to take too much sediment, but then if you don't cut deep enough, then you leave some sediment behind, and you ground up the wheels have sort of just churned it in on the edges. And so we said, those front-end loaders aren't going to cut it. But we were thinking that graders would be more appropriate, so we had one grader, because we had to get some more eventually, but we had one grader, and you could set the blade at the angle at which the oil was occurring on the beach, and you could scrape it up into windrows, and then you could use the front-end loaders to pick up the oil. And so we did this all, and within a period of hours, everybody came there and said, yes, let's go ahead. We got the FOSC to approve the use of mechanical. So we developed some criteria for what kind of oiling in terms of thickness and extent of the buried oil that we would use to use mechanical, because we still want to minimize mechanical use. And then we had SCAT teams go out and delineate against those criteria. And then we were going to monitor, and then push. One thing about oil spills, something's going to be different tomorrow, right? So you want to revise as needed for changing conditions. So within hours, we determined pretty quickly that one section of beach, there was about 3 miles of pretty heavily, a thicker buried layer, that we decided that we need to push hard to get that out of the intertidal zone, because what's going to happen tomorrow? It's going to either get buried more or it's going to get out, right? So we wanted to do rapid removal, so we said, okay, mechanical, let's start working on that whole 3 mile area. And so here we are in the evening, the same day that we discovered all this. We've got this grader. I don't know how many of you are involved in sort of cleanup of oil and sand beaches, but that's oil sand. You don't very seldom see oil, darkly stained sand like that during beach cleanups. And usually you wonder, where's the oil and all the material that they've recovered. So, within a few hours, before dark, we got started working. We go back to the Round Holiday Inn. We're congratulating ourselves, doing those, celebratory things, but that we had solved the problem. So, what do you think happened? That night, we had another little blow. I mean, not a big one, just a little high tide blow, and so we make this little notch there at high tide, and we get up the next morning. What do you think it looked like? Oh, a lot of bad words were spoken. And so here are the oils, back on the surface again. And so like I said, what's going to happen is going to get buried deeper or get exposed. And so in these cases, it got exposed. And so luckily, the FOSC had not released any of the 1,200 cleanup workers. And so they called all the cleanup workers from where they were, on the edges, and they came here, and we got them all, shoveling the oil into a pile right at the high tide zone. So here they are shoveling, and we finally got OSHA to give us permission to have the Tyveks around the waist after putting, dozens of people in the hospital from heat exhaustion. Patrick talked about that as a big issue. So, and then we had all those front-end loaders, right? So here we have them, we have the dirty ones on the right side and the clean ones on the left, because we don't want to drip anything, because that upper beach was very, very clean. There was nothing there. So, so now we have the front-end loaders, picking up. Now you notice how dirty the sand is, right? And they're passing it over to the from the dirty side to the clean side. And then here's the area that they passed through. We had another series of cleanup workers picking up the dribs and drabs that were left behind after this quick mechanical removal. Because what's going to happen is going to get buried again. So we already know this pattern about especially in the Gulf of Mexico, where the tidal range is relatively small. A little bit of wave action can affect the beach very quickly. Even though most of the time fine-grained sand beaches don't change as quickly, but when you have a small tidal range, that does happen. Okay, so we got the stuff on the surface, but all of the buried oil did not get washed out, just in certain areas. So now we have this. So there's some oil got out on the surface. You can see that. Now we're in day. We're in, I think, in the 22nd. So we're 7 or 8 days after the response. So what do we do about this? We're going to take mechanical and take all that clean sand on top, just to get that 1 centimeter layer. What do you do? So, well, we came up with some criteria for, we had a red flag was used, and we used red and yellow flags because those were the two colors at Walmart, right? That was the surveyor flags. And so the red flag was places where there was a buried layer, and we were going to do manually side cast the clean and then remove the oil layer. And then the yellow flag, we said it was too patchy and we're going to use another technique. And so SCAT teams went out and did the survey. And so here's a, you walk along, see the little red flag in the lower left corner? You know, it's like, oh, it's a little sharp line right there, instant. That's where the cleanup workers started doing the manual side removal of the clean layer and then side casting the clean layer and then removal of the subsurface layer. So you can see them doing that, scooping out the little layer of, you know, just a centimeter or so of buried oil in the sediment. Because, you know, these are very high use amenity beaches. Okay, so that was the red flag area, and then the areas that were yellow flags, there was still some buried oil there, but we didn't think it was appropriate to do the manual removal of it. We were going to use something called surf washing or sediment relocation. So we kind of had people clean the surface up, but when it was stained sand, a little thin layer of oil sand, we were going to do something called surf washing. So here's the manual surface scraping. You know, that would have all been washed off by itself in just a little bit of time, but you know, people were in a hurry to get the beaches opened up. And then we developed some guidelines for when we use surf washing versus the manual removal of the buried layer, and that was to take sort of to push the area, the depth of where the oil was buried into the surf zone, let the waves rewash the sediment and separate the oil from the sand. You know, this oil still floated. Sometimes that doesn't work, but this oil did. And so you push in there and you see how much oil gets refloated, and then it's kind of hard to see, but that's quite a bit of oil. And so you know, we had everybody watching. So when the FOSC said, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" We said, "You know, that's too much." So that, you know, so when we had too much release that we didn't feel like we could recover it, that's when we went back to the red flag, you know, fitness. So essentially, after the areas that were, essentially after we did all the buried oil removal by mechanical techniques, essentially along 12 miles of shoreline, we used surf washing as a final polishing step. Again, because we wanted to make sure that there was no oil in there that kids could kind of encounter when they, you know, do their thing on the beach. And so we put out that many miles of snare on a rope, and you can see this is a picture taken just hours after the sediment relocation, with the waves active over a really narrow tidal range that built the sediment right back into a nice sand berm pretty quickly. And I was very impressed with how much oil was retained by these snares. And there was enough oil to be worthwhile. This is a heavy fuel oil. You know, use snares called the viscous or the viscous oil sweep, and it worked really well. So we recovered a lot of the oil that went through the surf washing. You don't want to just push it to the surf and let it come back on the shoreline. You have to recover it. So the final techniques, again, high use amenity beaches. You know, this is economics over environment, right? So after we did the mechanical, manual, surf washing, then just to make sure, they went back and did tilling of the beaches to make sure there was nothing that broken up, and then a final beach walk and signed off by everybody. So here we are tilling to break up any other residues. And so in summary, you know, sand beaches, they're supposed to be, you know, the habitat, one of the easiest to clean to some degree, but you have to worry about oil penetration and burial, which is a function of grain size. And it's important to understand where you are in that beach cycle. You know, when I get a call about an oil spill, one of the first things I do is I look to see what phase of the moon we're in, because, you know, we're going from, you know, from neap to spring, where we have potential for, you know, higher levels of water and burial, and the wave, you know, the short-term, you know, past wave conditions to look for potential, you know, where there's potential for burial. You know, there's a whole wide range of cleanup techniques. When you look at some of the job aids that NOAA's put together, our cleanup methods, there's a bunch of techniques. And you know, when we use a lot of times a lot of multiple techniques to know to be effective for different conditions. We always prefer manual if we can, but sometimes we push to mechanical, because, especially for buried oil, because the need to either get it soon before it gets buried deeper, or sooner before it gets exposed. And you know, mechanical methods may be needed for those, you know, more heavily oiled and higher use amenity beaches, because of their economic value over their ecological resources. That's it.